The goal of feedback is not meant to make somebody feel bad. In fact, it's just to help encourage them to be even a better leader and keep doing what they do. Hey, ScouterStan, this is a very critical issue. Talking about feedback versus criticism. They're two different things. And feedback is very important. So we need to talk. That's usually how it starts. When a leader has to talk with another leader about an issue, about something they missed. That's very common. But the last thing you want the leader to walk away with is, geez, I can't do anything right. They just constantly pick at every little thing. That's something that a lot of leaders don't know how to give that feedback. And I know you do, but there's a lot of leaders out there that don't know the process of giving good feedback. And when we miss that, there is an immense issue, because immediately that leader that's being picked on is not able to really function and feels like they have no place in scouting. And we need them. We don't need them to run away when people don't use feedback and they use criticism instead. Remember that leaders in your unit are not employees. They're not getting a paycheck. They don't have an annual review. They don't have pension plans and all the other stuff. They're volunteers just like you. And because of that, they deserve your critiques, which are in the form of being constructive feedback. Volunteer leaders are so incredibly valuable. We need them. Scouting wouldn't happen without those leaders really giving their time. And if you're criticizing what they do without that additional support, they're not going to stay. They're going to go. Okay? So it is so absolutely critical that good feedback is given, and that helps your leadership, your volunteers, really understand they're appreciated. And I understand that every unit has conflicts. There's always issues, and that happens quite often. In fact, I did a video, check that out, that talks about that conflicts. Conflicts, if handled well, can be resolved and make your unit stronger. So that's a very key thing to know. Conflicts are naturally there, and this video really goes into detail about that. Separate the person from the problem or issue. That is critical. You can't just label people. And constructive feedback has built into it a way to correct, a way to change, a way to improve. That is a critical part of feedback. Now, you just can't give feedback like, you don't know how to really run a meeting, do you? That's very confrontational, and that's not scouting like. It's not friendly. So you need to taper that. I think that the meeting, you might have lost the attention of the scouts. Let's talk about a way to really make that different. That is very constructive feedback. That way you're partnering with the individual and trying to work out a solution. That's the key. If we can work on the solution versus the actual issue, that's there, okay? But if we don't make that issue that person, that's the key. You have to be willing to give that feedback because it is a gift and you want to make sure that it's received well, that you're there to help and to help that leader grow and actually become a better leader. Ask before you just tell. This is so important. You can't just jump on that right away and say, hey, here's where you went wrong. That is going to be held, that's going to be held back a little bit, okay? They're going to go, don't come at me, it's so quick. That's not feedback. That's the thing. That's criticism. It's far better to ask first, how do you think things went? Let them talk. If they're going to talk about it, then you can say, well, you got a point there. That is something that can be corrected. That is something that can be given a benefit. So there's some things to talk about. It's a conversation. That's real feedback. When you can really critique through that process instead of being confrontational, so much better. Praise publicly and correct privately. This is very important. We talked about that in the video with conflicts. In that issue, it is critical that it's separated. Publicly, you can say, oh, what a wonderful, great job. You did wonderful. This was great. All the information was covered. You presented it great. That you do publicly. On the other hand, if it didn't go so well, being that helpful person, asking and going through that process, once you are doing that, it should not be in a public situation. Never do it on stage. It's always done, not necessarily if it's a scout, privately. It's done with other scouters there, so you keep the 2D process. But if it's adult leaders, you can take them aside and say, hey, this is something you need to work on. This is a very important part of that presentation that you missed. So let's work on that. Let's work together. That's the key. But always remember, if you're giving praise for a job well done, be very specific, and that's it. Don't continue on and start talking about each part and how great they did, because then that becomes a critique, and that is not feedback. If someone deserves recognition, do that recognition right away, small. Get it done. Don't critique every little bit of everything they did. That gets it's a critique at that point, right? It's not necessarily good, helpful feedback. But if something needs correction, pull them aside. That's the key. You have to keep that so that it doesn't become a public shaming. Okay, that's not what we do in scouting. Hey, before we go any further, I want to personally invite you to come to the Campfire Chat. We have this on the very first Sunday of each month, starting at 9 p.m. I also want to personally thank all of the supporters on Patreon. This is a great way to help out on what we do here. Also, I want to get you involved in the channel. You can join the channel by hitting the join button on any of the screens that you see. This will help you get more information about what is going on in our membership of our channel, and it's a great way to help us out. Definitely check out the big list here for your name. Don't unload the entire list of things or issues or problems all at once. Try to narrow it down to one thing. It's far easier to do that. Think about, make notes, okay? It's okay. If you're helping someone learn how to do a board review, or you're helping somebody with learning how to do a Scoutmaster's conference, okay? That's important. You're there as their 2D leader, and you're there to give feedback, good feedback, but make notes, okay? Don't go over every single thing. Pick one, okay? You'll talk about the others later, but feedback should not be a download of a bunch of data. It would be difficult to kind of put it together so that it's understood, and that the leader is actually finding that feedback to be an improvement, not criticism. Timing matters. This is super critical when giving good feedback. Take your notes. For instance, if you're having a session with the Scoutmaster or the assistant Scoutmasters where they're learning how to do a Scoutmaster's conference, the second person in that 2D leadership is making notes about that Scoutmaster, assistant Scoutmaster doing that conference. Don't do it right away. You say, we'll talk about it tomorrow. That's a wonderful way, because a lot of times these meetings, these Scoutmaster conferences are right after the youth meeting. So you could go late into the night. You don't, for us, they got to get up and go to school tomorrow. So that's the thing. It's important that you defer it for a very specific amount of time, saying, we'll talk about it tomorrow. And that's a critical skill to being able to look at all those notes and all the different things and try to boil it down into one item. That makes it so much easier. It can feel like when you're giving feedback with a bunch of little things or problems or different things, it can feel like a personal attack. So you have to think of it from their end. How would you want it presented to you? How would you like to get that feedback about your type of presentation, your type of thing that you do? So it can be, you can think of it third party, outside of the whole realm of scouting. Is it an attack? Is it an opinion? Is it something that you found works that maybe they can adapt into? Is this something that they can pick up? There's a ton of that information. This is one of those things that a lot of people, when they talk about feedback, they don't think about what the actual things in there that can be constructive. That's the key. Now, there are exceptions to this. If it's something to do with safeguarding youth, that needs to be addressed immediately. When it's first recognized, it needs to be done immediately. Our job is safety. We have gone through tons of training on safety. So that is the priority. That's not feedback. That's the reality. That's the job of being an adult leader, is to make sure that our youth are safeguarded against any of those bad things that they talk about during that training. So you have had that training. You know when to step up, when to step in. That's the very important part. That's not about feedback. So make sure that if something isn't right, that falls into that category of safety, that needs to be addressed immediately. Give them a path forward. That's the thing about feedback. You want to make sure that the presentation, the critique, or whatever you're putting together that it really is feedback and it's constructive. Now this falls back on communications. Communications is the most important part of being a scout leader. Take a moment and start the two-parter that's there that actually talks about communications. Being able to get that two-way communications during feedback is really a gift. It really helps the scout improve, scout or scouter, to improve what they have presented. So instead of saying in your feedback, you really don't do Scoutmaster conferences really well. No, that's not very helpful. Okay, be specific on what exactly they don't do well. That's the cure. Next time, maybe you should ask more questions and let the scout talk more. That might be helpful for any Scoutmaster conference, to make sure that you're getting that information from the scout. Don't assume. That's a critical part of that. Make sure that you're there, and when you're giving that critique and you're understanding what's going on, that's the critical thing. That's the ball they got to get across the line. That's the important part, is getting that information, getting that conveyed specifically to the person that you're giving the feedback to. Don't confuse different with doing something wrong. That's the thing. We're all individuals. When you see something going through in that process, their presentation, and you're going to give that feedback, it should be not from your standpoint, but from the actual thing that was being covered from that standpoint, not necessarily how you would do it. If you want to help that person, that comes through later. So saying that something's different doesn't make it wrong. You need to ask yourself, is this actually a problem with understanding the presentation, the meeting? Is it a problem? Or is it a perception that you have of, say, not having control of the room when you're giving a presentation? That is another issue. So is that something that you would do differently, or is it something that you can help that presenter with feedback, constructive feedback, to actually take action on correcting? So it is a very critical communication skill, and being able to help others at all times, right? That's what we're doing as scout leaders. Remember to end with encouragement. Whenever giving feedback, you have to have a correction, a way to make the difference. You forgot to cover this on that knot, what it can be used for. You just went about how it's put together. You have to put that in there. You could say, hey, that knot is very helpful when you're doing sailing. There's several ways to tie it differently. So if you're coming up on a dock pole, you can just drop it on there and it'll tie up, and it'll be a lot easier instead of just going through the motions. So there's little things you can add to the actual feedback that will actually encourage improvement. Sometimes feedback can just be encouragement. You can say, I appreciate you took the time to talk about this subject. It's important. And I appreciate that you took it upon yourself to really talk about it. Very helpful. Thank you. That kind of feedback is what the presenter wants. That's what they need. They will perfect their presentation over time. You give a same presentation 5, 6 times, you'll have it down, okay? You'll have it totally down. That's the key, is that with good feedback, you get good results. Yeah, we talk about it all the time. You do so much for your scouts. Please keep up the good hard work. I'm so proud of you as a scout leader. That is so, I'm impressed, okay? But keep up that good work. Oh my gosh. We are building a better America, one scout at a time. And feedback is a wonderful way to help all scout leaders everywhere to really perfect what they do and know that they're needed and appreciated. That's the key. We constantly say feedback is a gift at Wood Badge. If you have not been to Wood Badge is a tremendous thing and you need to go, okay? If you've been, you know, those guys, the singing ones. Definitely check out the video right over there about Wood Badge. Until next time, I'll see you on the trail.